How does a conflict in Europe affect worldwide food security? Russia's invasion in Ukraine is forcing millions of Africans to the brink of starvation in the worst hunger crisis in decades. According to the United Nations World Food Program, Russia and Ukraine together produce 30% of the world wheat. In fact, 50% of the Africa's wheat import come from both countries, and the prices have risen by 19% due to the inflation and exacerbated by fuel costs. Russia and Ukraine are also major global producers and suppliers of fertilizers, as well as other food staples like maize, rapeseed, sunflower seeds, and oil. How can Africa be proactive in spurning this hunger crisis on top of geopolitical conflicts and natural disasters? We'll discuss this and more on today's Our Voices. Hello, I'm your guest host, Abby Sun, and this is Our Voices. As the spillover effects of the war in Ukraine threatens to push millions of people closer to famine, the United Nations is allocating $15 million to address food insecurity in Nigeria and other 5 African nations. Even before the Ukraine war, Nigeria's worsening security situation has forced many farmers to abandon their farmlands. Hassan Bala sent this report from Abuja.
As this year's rainy season begins in some parts of Nigeria, farmers are also planning to return to farm to grow their foods. Yabu Shaibu and his brother Abdullahi are small-scale farmers cultivating a farm in the suburb of Abuja, Nigeria's capital. They are among thousands of Nigerian farmers who resort to working on small farms close to their homes due to insecurity and the lack of fertilizers.
The government said we can buy fertilizer at 5,500 naira per bag. But as I speak with you now, we don't see the government fertilizer. We travel as far as Kano to procure fertilizer. The high cost of fertilizer is worrisome. It used to be 13,000 naira per bag, but now a bag of urea is 20,000 naira. We cannot afford other quality brands of fertilizer too.
They are among thousands of Nigerian farmers who resort to working on small farms close to their homes due to insecurity and the lack of fertilizers. In March, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization warned that 19.4 million people in Nigeria could face food insecurity this year. The UN body attributed this to insecurity in some part of the country and the rising food prices. Kidnapping for ransom, Boko Haram insurgency, and banditry have forced many farmers to abandon their farms. And despite numerous government agricultural programs, Nigeria relies on $10 billion of imports to meet its food and agricultural production shortfalls.
Nigeria tana da matsala wajen
Nigeria is facing serious challenges of ensuring food self-sufficiency, but at the same time, the government is trying to make agriculture attractive for more people to engage.
What is the way out?
There are many ways to get it right, but the first thing to do is to reconcile with the bandits who are terrorizing farmers. If they refuse to renounce their terrorist activities, the government should use force against them to ensure security for our farmers.
The Nigerian government has said it will continue to provide farmers with capital, fertilizer, and other support to produce enough foods for the country and export. But for the Nigerian farmers, that can only be achieved when their security on the farmlands is guaranteed. Hassan Bala, VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
For more of the hunger emergency in West Africa and how it has reached a record high, I spoke to the World Food Programme's Deputy Regional Director, Avert about how Russia's invasion into Ukraine is impacting West Africa's hunger crisis. The ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict has exacerbated food insecurity globally. For Africa, it means massive hunger as a result of the surge of food and fuel prices since February. How is the situation on the ground right now in West Africa?
Just to put things into perspective, I think it's very important to say that we are actually expecting 43 million people to go hungry in the next month, starting June. This is happening actually already before the Ukrainian crisis. The main drivers of this food security crisis are actually conflict, COVID, and the impact of climate change in this region. So on top of that now, we have the crisis that is due to a war that is being fought far away from the Western African region. Already we can tell that only one family out of two is able to afford a nutritious diet in this region. I think we are heading towards a huge food crisis, and in decades, this is a year of unprecedented needs.
I would like to know more about specific unique challenge that West Africa is facing in terms of combating food insecurity.
As you know, this is a region where there's a lot of political instability. We're talking about Mali, we're talking about Burkina Faso, northern part of Nigeria, Central African Republic, where many parties are fighting. The local communities, especially those who are the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, and especially women and children are the ones who are actually paying the brunt of this conflicts. They have to abandon their fields, and of course, with that also the government is retrieving and with the communities losing access to some of the basic services. So this is, and plus, the effect of climate change is quite devastating. We are expecting every year we have to face floods and droughts, putting families to cultivate less and less. So access to cultivable land, fertile land, is becoming reduced, not only for the conflict, but also because, the process of desertification and the process and the heat wave is hindering the families to actually continue to be food secure as a result of their direct tilling of their land.
As you mentioned, all the challenges the West Africa region is facing right now, but there's no short of existing policies and programs in place in the framework. It bears a question, what is missing? Is this political willingness? Is this lack of technology? In other words, what could be done? What could be changed when we aggregated all those money and effort?
I think we are heading towards unprecedented times where the needs are unprecedented, and the type of measures that are required, they must be unprecedented. And you can see governments, they tend to put in place like measures to protect their own market, right? Especially in the face of a projected food shortage and then the consequences of the inflation spike that we are actually witnessing. And what we are asking actually is to say, please don't put those barriers, but allow the movement, the free movement of food and agricultural commodities across the region. So at the same time, another thing that we are really looking at is to continue to invest on communities. And one of our flagship is the Sahel Integrated Resilience Program. We have been actually working with the communities in reclaiming lands, in restoring the degraded lands. So basically, barren lands are brought back to life and redistributed, especially amongst the population that are the most marginalized. At the same time, we need also to boost the economy by supporting the supply chains, for example, supporting the smallholder farmers to bring their food to the market and to link them to create value chains, and at the same time also investing in the children. Given the fact that we are talking about this region where you have a very young population, it's very important to continue to invest in them.
Do not set barriers to the free flow of the commodity market is Avert Puccini's quest to the governments. Yet, millions of Africans are feeling the impact as the chaos on the global commodity market hits goods like palm oil. David Doyle of Reuters explains.
Thousands of miles from Ukraine's battlefield, Jennifer Belem is frying bean cakes. She may be far from the conflict, but her stall in Ivory Coast's commercial capital, Abidjan, is not immune to its impact. The war has wreaked havoc on global commodities markets, and for 35-year-old Belem, that's meant the price of palm oil, one of her biggest business costs, has skyrocketed.
Customers complain that the cake has become smaller than before, but we also try to make them understand that it's not our fault. The market has become expensive. We can't buy oil. It's really become difficult.
Palm oil is ubiquitous in African cooking. The continent imported over 7.7 million tons in 2019, according to the most recent data from the Food and Agriculture Organization. And the tropical commodity is not produced in Russia or Ukraine. Belem's predicament is an illustration of how shockwaves have rippled through an intricately interconnected global economy. One factor is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation, effectively removed a huge share of sunflower oil exports. The two countries account for more than half of global supply. 30 miles east of where Belem sells her fried bean cakes, Sylvain Cho is inspecting palm seeds. He's the deputy general manager at this palm oil mill and says the shortage of sunflower oil means people are migrating to palm.
And if demand becomes even higher, it's clear that there will be a further increase in the price of crude palm oil. The other problem is that this conflict may cause problems with the availability of fertilizers and therefore ultimately reduce productivity on the plantations.
Ivory Coast happens to be a net exporter of palm oil. But Uncho says that hasn't shielded Ivorian consumers against the whims of the international market.
When there's an increase there is systematically an increase on the local market.
Tens of millions of Africans have already been pushed into extreme poverty by the global health crisis. Any change in prices presents many on the continent, like Belem, with difficult calculations. For her, a 25-litre jug of palm oil has risen in price by more than 30%, and further hikes are expected. Her income, she says, has been cut in half.
It's time for a break. When we return, we'll look at how basic food necessities like oil, maize, wheat are beyond reach for many, especially in Zimbabwe, where a loaf of bread is now $2. We'll be right back.
Empowerment and humanity towards a better world.
Economic and social progress of every society.
Facts and information from key players rather than spectators in politics, business, science and technology.
City, rural, educated or underprivileged. We care and we listen to what matters to you.
Your voices are our voices.
Welcome back. You're watching Our Voices. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, food prices could rise by another 20% worldwide, which could be unbearable for poor nations. As bread prices soar in Zimbabwe, the Grain Miller Association warns of possible bread shortage after Ukraine was forced to suspend its shipment due to Russia's invasion. Columbus Muhanga reports from Harare.
Christine Kayumba is one of many citizens feeling the pinch of rising prices in Zimbabwe. She can't afford to buy bread for her 4 dependents on her salary of less than $250 a month because a loaf now costs more than $2. She says she cooks a bland, thin porridge 3 times a day and rarely serves rice, as it is now expensive too.
This price increase of bread has reduced me to nothing, my brother. I don't think I'm still the mother figure, the breadwinner for my family, because I'm failing to provide. Each and every morning they wake up crying for porridge, they wake up crying for bread.
The Grain Millers Association of Zimbabwe, which imports grain, blames the Russia-Ukraine conflict for the steep climb in prices. The two countries account for 65% of Zimbabwe's wheat imports.
And suddenly we woke up with the world without that supply levels. Now we are making efforts to see how best we can get from other countries. Australia, there's issue of floods which affected the agriculture. We are now pushing towards getting wheat from Canada and other countries.
Musarara says a consignment of Zimbabwe's wheat has been stuck in the embattled Ukrainian city of Mariupol for weeks now. Zimbabwe Agricultural Society is a group responsible for promoting agricultural development in the country. It sees some opportunity in the current wheat shortages the country is facing.
And I think this is an opportune time for our farmers to produce more, for the government and the private sector to work together hand in hand to support farmers who want to go into wheat production. And thank God we've been having some late rainfalls, which have also helped in land preparations.
That would certainly be good news for people like Kayumba, who cannot buy bread now because it's too expensive. Many of the country's farm fields are currently full of corn. Matibiri said if the shift to wheat production succeeds, Zimbabwe can export wheat to the region and get some much needed foreign currency. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Ukraine and Russia are not only countries exporting food around the world, so is South Africa. The conflict between European nations has left a sore taste with their citrus farmers, who are facing millions of dollars in losses over sanctions that had closed the Russian market. South Africa is the world's largest citrus exporter, and the farmers are scrambling to find other markets before the fruit spoils. Linda Giftach reports from South Africa.
South Africa normally sees up to 10% of its $2 billion in citrus exports headed to Russia. That's now on hold because of sanctions from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After 2 years of export disruptions from the coronavirus pandemic, unrest, and cyber attacks on the ports, the loss of the Russian market is another blow to South African farmers.
I think we will survive this one. But yeah, it's going to be a tough year. And although demand is growing in the current markets, it's not growing that fast or rapidly that it can absorb this. The 10%.
Farmer Pete Engelbrecht was forced to reroute a shipment of lemons this season that was on a vessel bound for Russia. But finding new markets isn't simple, even for well-established family farms.
The markets are very susceptible to oversupply. And because the product obviously can't be stored for any length of time, if there's too much in the market, it either has to be seriously discounted to move the fruit quicker, or it just wastes eventually.
Russia's war on Ukraine has also pushed up production costs with effects beyond the current season.
A lot of our fertilizer and a lot of our fuel is also from Russia and Ukraine. So that is, although it already is, in some cases it doubled, in some cases it tripled. I think we will have more of an effect in the coming few months. So yes.
Meanwhile, rising fuel costs are hitting all areas of South Africa's transportation and trade. Economists warn that will have a longer-term effect on the economy, mainly for consumers and the poor, who spend most of their income on food.
You're going to see inflation going through the roof. What is really going to be bad for South Africa is that the kind of inflation that we're going to experience will be very high levels of food inflation because of the Ukraine and Russia being major grain producers and also other soft commodities.
While South Africa's farmers are hopeful that they can survive the market loss, if future growing seasons are disrupted, they may have to cut jobs. With South Africa's unemployment rate hitting a record 35%, the citrus industry's 120,000 workers want to see a recovery soon so their jobs won't be at risk. Linda Giftash for VOA News, Groblersdal, South Africa.
How are you coping with rising food prices? And how should governments and the global community address the hunger crisis and lack accessibility to food? Please share your thoughts on our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Our handle is @VOA Our Voices. We're also on WhatsApp. Our number is on your screen. It's time for another break. When we come back, my colleagues Auriane and Simonish will join me for a discussion on the food crisis. Stay with us.
Living in Kenya, it's a bit expensive. Most of the politicians, they don't consider the less fortunate or the people who live below $1. And when I go to supermarket, I used to buy 2 kgs of flour, 98 bob, nowadays is 126. Tissue, I used to buy 250, nowadays 275. The same things apply to milk. Sometimes you can go to the supermarket to get the milk, but sometimes you can't. Then other things like sausage, for the pleasure sausage, I used to buy for $5.99, right now it's $8.50. Then other things are like tissue, sugar, houses are becoming more expensive. And there's nothing you can do.
Just because of the, maybe because of government policies, they don't purchase enough maize from the farmers. And so the farmers sell their produce at a throwaway price. Right now, the government says that they don't have maize in the stores. Yet, in some few months behind, farmers were selling their maize at a throwaway price. So I think the government should do something about it.
Welcome back. You're watching Our Voices. This week, we're discussing Africa's food crisis made worse by the war in Ukraine. What are some global efforts put in place to avert a looming food crisis in Africa? In addition, what are some solutions we're seeing in communities to cope with rising food prices? My Our Voices colleagues, Auriane Itangishaka and Simonish Yokuyi, join me for a conversation. When I conducted the interview with the World Food Program West Africa Region Deputy Director, I asked her a question, what's her worst fear? And she said, we've seen this in the past, and history has a pattern to repeat itself, right? So we've seen it in 2018 when the food price went up, and that caused social unrest and huge protests in Mozambique, and also the notorious 1994 Arab Spring. So I don't think the situation is what people want to see, either for the governments on the African continent or the world leaders.
Indeed, the situation of world hunger and food crisis is happening, not just because of the Ukraine and Russia crisis that we've been seeing lately, but also because there's still a ripple effect from the COVID-19 pandemic. Some people are saying that there is an actual food crisis pandemic happening around the world. And so hopefully and thankfully, the UN is stepping in. We've seen the UN releasing $100 million to fight hunger in 6 African countries, including Yemen. The humanitarian support will go to countries, for instance, they're saying that 30 million will go to the Horn of Africa, which will be divided between Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya, 20 million going to Yemen. Sudan will receive also 20 million. South Sudan will receive 15 million, as well as Nigeria receiving 15 million. There was some objection to that from some people. I'll read one of them on Twitter, who, after seeing the tweet of the $100 million that's going to go to Africa, this is HBG, who said, eliminate the dictators and thieves. People in these countries don't need handouts. They need proper governance and development. But of course, we know that when there is a crisis, when there is issues, there's always a long-term and a short-term goal to trying to mitigate the issue. And so hopefully the 100 million will come to mitigate some of the short-term goals, and then governance, of course, will come after.
Yeah, of course, media and social media, especially nowadays, has a way to keep governments accountable. So hopefully this will be something, the money allocated in fighting this crisis will go to tangible means and real solutions.
Indeed, the global efforts Auriane mentioned are very important. But in the meantime, there are also local initiatives within the continent to help reduce food insecurity. And farmers need climate resilient technologies to boost food production. So I saw that African Development Bank is currently leading a project to help African farmers produce more wheat, rice, maize, and soya bean. These are products that have been imported from Ukraine and Russia. Also, in addition, there are other initiatives by non-government organizations like Rise Against Hunger that's trying to promote community gardening and home gardening in Senegal, for example, where people are now trying to grow fruits and vegetables. Also in Mali, the same organization is trying to introduce high-yielding crops and improved livestock husbandry. In addition, in Kenya, also the government is trying to help introduce a mobile application that diagnoses crop disease and monitor pests. And this has been instrumental in improving food security in Kenya, especially it helped manage the worst locust swarm in 75 years the country faced last year. So I would say, such local efforts and initiatives need to be encouraged and supported more.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear all the positive news and innovative solutions coming from the grassroots, from the community. So I guess what we can hope is there actually are, collective efforts from both the government, international organizations, and private sectors and local community to have this collective efforts to put the money and effort into the real hands and solving the real problems. That's our show for this week. To catch up the latest episodes of Our Voices, please visit VOA's website at voanews.com or YouTube channels. On behalf of the Voice of America and my Our Voices colleagues, I'm Abby Sun. Thank you for watching.